Hi, everyone. This is Scarlett Johnson with Moms for Liberty Unplugged. And today I have a special guest, Daniel Buck. He is a research fellow leading conservative education reform at AEI, American Enterprise Institute. He's taught in public, private, and charter schools and has served as the assistant principal at Lake Country Classical Academy, which is here in Wisconsin, and it is a great school. Parents, friends of mine have their children enrolled, and they love it. They rave about it. He is an author, writing scholarly articles and great pieces in national publications like the Wall Street Journal, and he is the author of What is Wrong with Our Schools. I had followed Daniel, but I first met him when he was working on education reform with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, which is an organization that absolutely slays, not only here in Wisconsin, but nationally. They are exceptional lawyers that take on pro bono cases involving the issues that we care about: liberty, freedom, parental rights, and they've just done a great job. They're doing God's work, fighting against kind of the woke insanity. So, Daniel, I'm so glad to have you on. You were a guest of my friend Missy a few weeks ago. But today I just wanted to kind of delve deeper into some of the curriculum that is in schools and you would have a really good perspective on the training videos, some of the slideshows that I have that actually maybe parents won't see them, but teachers and administrators are forced to sit through these struggle sessions all the time, probably even some right now as we're about to start school. So thanks for being on. And if you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Definitely want to give props to the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. They're doing the Lord's work in the cases that they're fighting. And also they have over 40 school board policies. So, you know, once a normie parent or a conservative or someone who's just kind of fed up with all of the crazy progressivism in schools, if they win a seat on the school board, well, then what do you do? And they've written all of these like word for word policies that you can just copy and paste. And they've done the work for you, consulting with, education experts to get their opinion on it, and then also lawyers to make sure all of the language in there kind of passes muster. So they're doing great work over there. It's funny that you asked what I'm working on right now, as we're about to talk about teacher professional development. Is I kind of very behind the scenes right now. It's not, I don't have any finished product, but I'm kind of open records requesting a whole lot of schools of education and teacher prep programs to see what are teachers actually learning, how are they being taught to teach, what are they being told about American history or English language arts or any of these things, to see how did all of this wokeness and progressivism get into schools, because I think a lot of it is through teacher prep, schools of education, those kinds of things.
And we may be, because I've been doing this now for 5 years and you have a background of education, so maybe we should explain a little bit about what we're talking about with these training with professional development. How much professional development does a teacher have to have every year? They're required, right, for their licensure. Mm-hmm. And what does that look like, and how does that affect the classroom?
There is on the margins of $26 billion that gets spent on professional development every single year in school districts. This flow of money is really what bankrolls a lot of the craziest ideas in education. You know, you have a DEI consultant. How are they going to make money? Well, a district has $26 billion. They have to spend it on something, buying somebody's curriculum, paying some speaker to come in. So they shell it out to all of these consultants that sell the latest fad, the latest thing. You know, you're not going to make money telling the school that, well, kids have to like memorize their math facts and sometimes sit down and work silently. That doesn't sell. That's not shiny. That's not new. That doesn't get everyone feeling good vibes. So whatever the latest fad is, whether or not it's successful, whether or not it's bought into progressivism or pretty normal, it bankrolls these crazy ideas. So teachers will spend, a week or two before the school year starts, from 8 to 5, 8 to 4, whatever it is, sitting through professional development. and then periodically once or twice a month throughout the year have after school meetings where the administrators don't have time to make all of this stuff. So they find a consultant stuff. They find another consultant who's made a teacher prep curriculum that they kind of buy and then just, present to their staff, or they bring in another speaker who's going to tell them about how, giving students zeros is racist or something like that.
I muted myself for a second, but most consultants, aren't they former teachers often? Because I know in Wauwatosa School District, when we were really fighting back against, we'll talk about that more, comprehensive sexuality education and a lot of the critical race theory and DEI, what I discovered were that the companies that they would hire, they had on staff as the trainers, the DEI consultants. They used to be teachers. Sometimes they would work in adjacent districts, or they're former administrators, and then they go into AVID, right? Like their former principal now becomes the head of AVID in Wisconsin, and they all know each other. Like they're in my district, our superintendent in my district, he has two brothers, and they're superintendents in other districts in Wisconsin. So it's a small world. So you become a consultant, well, you know everyone, you pitch to your friends, and eventually maybe, hey, you'll become a consultant too, and then you get to make really high that compared to a teacher's salary. And you could talk about this. What is the difference between a teacher's salary and that of a paid consultant?
Oh, so much more. I mean, a teacher will make anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 a year. I think about Wisconsin passed this Act 20 law to push for phonics. Big fan of it, love phonics, but a piece of that was all teachers basically in the state have to go through a phonics training. And the state of Wisconsin approved it was 3 or 5 vendors. And if every teacher has to go through that, each teacher is anywhere, depending on the program, costs about $200 to $500 per teacher. The district has to spend all of that money. This is millions upon millions upon millions of public monies funding towards these 3 phonics curricula. The amount of money that you can make off of consulting, there is no ceiling, essentially. So you're asking me how much do they make? It's like, well, $50,000 a year if they're not very good at it, millions upon millions upon millions of dollars if they get on one of these, state approved vendor lists where you are the only phonics curriculum, you are the only discipline curriculum, you are the only, DEI re-education consultant that gets to work in the state. Then they get all the teachers in that state, anywhere from $200 to $1,000 per teacher per head, and it's exorbitant amount of money.
And we've got CISA, which, maybe you could explain a little bit about that, because is that unique to Wisconsin? I think, is that kind of a national thing?
I would not be able to answer that question.
Okay. Well, CISA does a lot of the grant writing for districts. So because they're constantly looking for money, CISA, like in Wisconsin, I don't know, we have several of them, but it's an organization that basically serves to write grants. And so then, then they know when there's a certain grant, find the consultant, all of that. But then when writing policy, oftentimes even school boards hire out, they will use another organization to write policy, like cut and paste policy, and it's been vetted. And even those organizations will say, hey, and we can, like, for example, for Title IX, when former President Biden tried to change Title IX and change the definition of sex to include gender identity, that went from 1 paragraph to 1,500 pages of federal rules. And so now all the districts were hiring consultants to explain to them, what do those rules mean? What does policy have to look like? So federal government kind of says, here's the policy. And then there's consultants and lawyers that the district hires to sort of explain it all and write the policy. And then even the school board, lots of times they'll just vote on whatever the consultants told them, the lawyers told them. But a lot of school board members have caught on to this, and now they aren't doing that anymore.
Yeah, it's all a racket in a way. The consultant will come in and they have, a very low entry point, and they say, "Hey, we'll come and do a policy review for you. We'll look at your discipline policies. We'll look at your, reading curricula and give your recommendations." And then lo and behold, all of their recommendations are products of theirs. I was a part of an effort that was trying to launch a classical charter school. We kind of got stonewalled by some authorizers in Wisconsin, but there was this consultant group that we were going to work with. And they looked over all of our documents for a very low price. And then sure enough, what did they find? Well, we needed all of these things to improve it. How could we get help with improving that? Give our money back to them. They only would get state money through basically consulting with charter schools. So they would do these audits and then sell you their product, and they could only do that with the state money. And it all kind of it was a self-referential, self-flowing, everyone giving everyone else their own money racket.
Is it the same like equity audits?
Yeah, same exact thing. Or in Tosa, they had where Wauwatosa, I wrote about them for the Wall Street Journal, their district in Wisconsin. They brought in this math consultant to improve their math instruction. And sure enough, what did he find? Well, they needed to adopt all of the policies and buy the books that he's going to make money off of. It's the same guy that kind of got rid of advanced education in a lot of California districts, came out here, and surprise, surprise, he found what was the problem with Wauwatosa? Well, they were teaching kids math facts and they had advanced math, and you need to do away with all of that because that's what's going to make me more money too. And
in Wauwatosa, they basically got rid of the most successful school in the district. Was it in Wisconsin for the most successful math program? And these were mainly kids. They were kids that were at poverty level or middle class, Black, Hispanic, a real diverse group. And it was a public school, it's sort of different though. Was it a charter school? It was a magnet or charter school. Yeah. It was like you said, I don't know if it was the most successful elementary school in the state, but it was one of the most successful elementary schools in the state. And Wauwatosa it's a middle-class community. The home income here, the incomes here are right along perfectly with the median household income, the medium household price across the country. It's where I live. We're not a super duper rich area. I have a son who lives in Wauwatosa because he goes to the Medical College of Wisconsin, and renting, it's high. The cost of rent is high because you're right by Children's Hospital, Froedtert Hospital, Medical College. So it's just this big complex. And so there's a lot of professionals there. And the Wauwatosa School District used to be one of the best in the state. It was, at one point, it was a premier school. And unfortunately, it's a school district that is now in severe decline. And some of the reasons I can show, we can start to talk about what's happening in schools and in education. I can show the curriculum. And this is in 2022. That's when I got really involved in what was happening in Wauwatosa. And this is relevant for the whole country because the curriculum that Tosa had adopted, and we could be here for hours if I were to talk about the way that they got they created a commission per Wisconsin statute, all the things that they did. It would be a very long show and I won't go into that, but needless to say, they eventually got a curriculum passed, and it's just outrageous, the curriculum. It is comprehensive sexuality education, and the writers of this curriculum are advocates for youth. It is a curriculum that was provided to Wisconsin through grants and federal funding, and therefore it was quote unquote free, Daniel, so free to the school district. However, once the school district adopted said program, guess what they needed to start to implement it? The free curriculum. Yeah, they needed a consultant. Yep. They needed to hire a consultant that could come in, and sometimes those consultants can be Planned Parenthood could come in. It can be someone that's privately contracted, but when I saw what was in this curriculum, I was outraged, and you can see some of the images. I said it was ground zero for this unproven curriculum in Wisconsin. It was created by the Future of Sex Education Initiative, a partnership with Advocates for Youth, SECUS, that's Sex Ed for Social Change. And it trains students in gender identity, sexual orientation, and other sex-themed topics from kindergarten straight through high school. You know the curriculum I'm talking about because you have written about it. Have you seen some of the lesson plans and images?
Yeah, I have. And I just want to do some level setting. Like, why are we talking about this random district in the middle of Wisconsin? And it's because it is a middle class district. It's an area that went for Walker, Republican governor, 10, 20 years ago, and now has swung super far to the left. It's a district that could be anywhere. We're not talking about San Francisco. We're not talking about Chicago. We're not talking about New York or kind of these, Portland, these notoriously progressive areas in notoriously progressive states. This is in flyover country, right? Wauwatosa could be any community, any suburb just outside of a city, anywhere in flyover normal America. This isn't just happening on the coasts in affluent blue districts. This is happening everywhere. What's on this curriculum? I mean, telling elementary schoolers that they can be transgender, just horribly graphic images. You saw that you had to black out some of them, the kinds of things that would get me probably kicked out of the school board if I went up there with a blown up version of it, being shown to little kids. That SECUS curriculum that you talked about is about as, I sound like a crazy person when I describe what's on this curriculum, but it has influenced, I think they claim, 20 or 30 states across the country and hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of districts. It teaches, third graders about puberty blockers. It frames, regardless of your opinion on abortion, but it frames it as just this unalloyed good. There's no controversy. Anyone who has any questions about it to elementary school students, again, regardless of your opinion on it, why are we teaching second graders about this? They don't need to get involved in that controversial of an issue. Transgenderism to kindergartners, sex assigned at birth to first graders. It's all there.
Yes, and I'm showing some of the slides. I always have to do this because you're right, Daniel. People would not believe what I'm saying if I don't show them the receipts because it sounds so crazy. And I'm glad that you mentioned that Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, the first district that implemented this, but certainly not the last. There are many other in Wisconsin that could be anywhere. This is not Madison, the capital of Wisconsin. This is not it's pretty much blue. It's a working color area. When the community found out about this curriculum through the efforts of groups like Moms for Liberty and a lot of community groups, so I got kind of brought in at the end. There was a whole parents group that had been set up, and they set up meetings, and they even created a website. They really tried to get the information out there. When they did that, the community reacted in horror. It became so unpopular that they had to do several school board meetings. They were pretty upset at us because we exposed what was happening, and they thought they could just slide it through. This happens all over the country. This is the curriculum. Mahmoud v. David, the historic Supreme Court decision that we had. I was there in DC as it was, as the Supreme Court released it. Mahmoud v. Taylor, that case revolved around this curriculum. It was this curriculum, Advocates for Youth, the same one in Wisconsin, the same curriculum in Wauwatosa that was introduced in the Montgomery County School District in Maryland. And the group of parents that united were Christian, Jewish, atheist, Muslim. this was a diverse group of parents that came together and said, we may not agree on a lot of things, but what we do agree on is that this curriculum is outrageous, it's inappropriate, and we want to opt our kids out. So many wanted to opt out that the school district, after just a month or two, denied the ability of parents to opt their kids out, even if it was based on a deeply held religious belief. That, when they did that, in 2022, 3 years later, going through the court system, finally the Supreme Court said, absolutely, parents have the right to opt their kids out of curriculum that they see that goes against their deeply held religious beliefs. And I'm sure I listened to the lawyers as they presented the case to the Supreme Court. I listened and I read the decision. It was amazing. The repercussions of this, we are going to see. I know lawyers at will and all over the country, conservative legal firms, pro bono firms, they are going to be very proactive using the Mahmoud decision. But just I'm saying it's a long way to get to the fact that this curriculum that we're talking about, that you saw, Daniel, in the state that we both live in, this is everywhere. And you need to be aware of it, because even after this decision, there are school districts that are saying, you know what, we don't want, this is too hard. Opting out is just, it's taking too much of our time. We really don't want to do it. And they're dragging their heels.
Yeah. Having worked in a school, though, it astounds me that they're saying that, because it's so easy to make an opt-out option. We had students that opted out of standardized testing, and you tell the parent, we're going to give all the rest of the kids a standardized test. Your kid, they are expected to bring work, something to do, or a book to read. We're not necessarily going to provide them an alternative activities during the standardized test. We're going to provide them a separate space. And if they act out, they're going to get in trouble for it. It's very easy. It's a very low lift for an administrator, for a teacher, to provide an opt-out option. So the idea that this is causing some administrative burden is it's a lie. Admittedly, it's an excuse. It's a way to argue against this without having to actually talk about the issue at hand. I think parents need to start opting out en masse. I think there's a lot of teachers out there that don't want to teach this stuff. Not every teacher is a blue-haired radical. They need to start giving these opt-out forms to parents and say, hey, we're going to be teaching this content. The district wants me to read Romeo and Juliet, but we have to do it through a feminist lens or through a critical race lens. So you know what? Here's the opt-out form. I'm going to encourage you all to opt out. And if the district starts having, if it really is creating an administrative burden, maybe that's a sign to the district or to the principal or to the superintendent that this isn't content we should be teaching anyways. Maybe that's a sign they should, read the public opinion and change what the curriculum is, change what they're teaching.
Here's another curriculum that was in a school district in Madison. This was for sixth graders. So, and this is considered like science, but they talk about gender. So this is how you can't imagine that this is just in sex education, because sometimes you think, okay, I'll opt my kids out of the sex education classes, even though they're trying to make that hard. Here's how this is going to be, how science is seen through the lens of gender ideology, and kind of some of the things that they've said, evolution, changing sex, like, hey, if fish can change their sex, so can you. And again, this is for sixth graders. And when I've shown this material to my son, he's like, yeah, but that's not exactly, this isn't exactly scientific what they're saying here.
Yeah. I posted recently, there's this network of teacher prep programs, 800 of them. They're kind of the leading institutions in most states. The University of Wisconsin-Madison is a part of this network, and they hosted this event for their members on how to queer the curriculum and how to do it in such a way that you can the word they used was find loopholes in laws that prohibit this kind of stuff. And what they recommended is working it into all the rest of the content, right? If you show up and you have a Pride Day or you have a transgender day, that's a big red flag. I mean, it's a pride flag, but it's a red flag to parents. Hey, I should opt my kids out of this. If you do it in the sex education curriculum, everyone's kind of already on edge and looking for something that's going to be, a little off. But if you work it into science, if you work it into an optional, choice book in literature, if it's one discussion on a day in a lit class on, a worksheet that you don't send home, you can work it throughout all of the curriculum without showing that obvious red flag and still incorporate these ideas, even though there's not one discrete lesson on it or one discrete unit on it.
Yeah, I thought this, not nearly all unopposed or bisexual, just kind of the interesting, but to get to then here, now this is Eau Claire and gender support plan. And this, what is stated here, this is again, national. This is this kind of language, national. Defending Education, formerly Parents Defending Education, has a website where they put how many school districts have policies like this. It was over 10 million the last time. Over 10 million children in school districts are subject to policies like this. And yeah, there's executive orders. We've got the Department of Education that's trying to withhold federal funding. We could talk a little bit about that. But these districts are really, they're very committed to gender ideology, to putting politics before kids. And so is this something that you'd ever seen, or is just that in your research you've seen different districts across the country have this kind of language?
It's mostly in my research that I've seen it. I spent in the latter half of my career, I saw where things were going and knew if I stayed in a traditional public school, I was either going to go absolutely insane or get myself fired. So before that happened, I moved, man, what images you are clicking through. I moved to...
That's a teacher in Wauwatosa right there.
Yeah. Is that the new art teacher?
He was a first grade teacher, so I'm not sure. I think he's now I think he's moved up and he's doing something else, I think now, but for many years he was a teacher.
Yeah, but I moved to Catholic and classical schools to kind of get away from all of this, so I blessedly did not experience it firsthand. I know in Milwaukee, just east of Wauwatosa, they have a policy where, if a student identifies as transgender on any overnight trip, right? Like I went on some of those as an athlete in high school. These trans identifying youth will stay in, overnight accommodations, hotel rooms, shower rooms with students of the opposite sex. I have a daughter. I don't care if that boy thinks he's a girl. I don't want him sleeping in the same room as my daughter. I don't want him in the same shower or bathroom as my daughter. A lot of these policies, like the gender support plans, are wrapped in this faux compassion, right? We don't want to expose these trans-identifying students to parental, oppression or outrage. We don't want them to feel otherized. But one, a student who identifies as trans, like they need our help. They don't need to be encouraged and further pushed into these delusions. And two, the advocates ignore all of the other people in this question, right? Okay, we don't want this one student to feel uncomfortable, but what about the 29 other girls who have to change in front of this guy who we don't know if he's lying. We don't know if he's having some sort of psychotic break. Like we gotta protect all the other students too.
I just live streamed last week a board meeting in Illinois in which the parents were lining up, basically saying that we want this school district to follow federal law to listen to basically look at Title IX as the way it was written in 1972. Sex is male, female. It doesn't include gender identity. And they felt this strongly because a biological male, 14 years old, had just made the girls' volleyball team, beating out 45 girls. And this male had never played volleyball before in his life. So took a spot of a girl playing on the team, showering and changing with the girls, making them uncomfortable. The coach quit in protest. And still, you've got the state of Illinois, you've got, and even that local school district just won't budge. They won't budge on this issue. And it just doesn't make sense. In polls, 80-20 issue. I think it is. I agree with the president. I think it's more of a 97-3 issue. I think that I don't know how you can say that you support women and yet you would want a male in a girl's locker and shower room, a teenage girl. Girls have trouble changing in front of other girls at that age. Having a boy present, I can't even imagine how humiliating and how uncomfortable that they are being forced to feel. And it's wrong.
I think one way to kind of demonstrate that is I don't like to imagine, but I imagine going back to 2010 even, and trying to explain to somebody in 2010 the situation you're in right now, that you will be called a bigot by the media, or it will be coded as right wing in the media to say that a guy who thinks he's a girl has crushed the competition, taken trophies from them, and wants the right to change in front of them, to shower with them. And if you disagree with that, you're a right winger.
It's not.
How do you explain that to somebody 15 years ago? It wouldn't even compute. You would be called a crazy person if you were saying like, this is what it's going to get to. They'd be, no, you're a culture warrior, slippery slope. That's never going to happen. But that's where we are.
So you kind of mentioned, you wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal where you talked about the fact that this woke curriculum is this could be in your school. Don't think that this is just in your most radical area of your state, that this is in normal suburban middle schools. And you mentioned something that I think when in my research and in my lived experience, what I've seen is after Trump was elected, it was like a Thanos snap. And the groundwork had been laid years before, but suddenly there was this push to really go hard for these critical theories, these pedagogies, and putting them into practice in the schools. Not just they were no longer going to just be discussed in graduate school studies or in professional development. They were going to actualize this stuff in schools, even in kindergarten.
Yeah, there were two things that kind of happened around the time of Trump's election and then COVID too. So before that, there was always kind of the two forces in education, kind of a progressive push and a more traditionalist pushback. It wasn't always conservative, but just normal people that said, I don't want this.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and a back and forth, and there was kind of an equilibrium. Everyone knew that the schools were left coded, center left, but maybe in the way of, like the Atlantic and New York Times reporting back then, center left. They weren't woke, they weren't crazy progressive, they weren't bought into all of these fringe beliefs. But when Trump was elected, suddenly you had all of the people on the traditional side not wanting to be associated with Trump or Trumpism. The center left normies didn't want to be considered these far right radicals. So they kind of wilted and stopped pushing back because they didn't want to be perceived as the bad guys. And then there was, the summer of love, 2020, all the riots in the street. That too, the former stalwarts, standing athwart a sanity, saying, no, we can give students suspensions. We shouldn't teach kindergartners about transgenderism. If a student doesn't do their work, they should get a 0. Kind of these normal common sense ideas. All of a sudden, the political pressure was turned up to 11, And again, they wilted. They just let the progressives have their way. And for 2, 3, 4 years, that progressive side, especially the fringy beliefs, just kind of ran rampant. And they had control over curriculum decisions, policy decisions. You had charter schools that used to be, some of the best in the country saying, well, working silently is racist, so we're not going to have any more silent work time. Quiet hallways is oppressive. That's a white person thing, which is like, you guys are the racists if you're saying that. All of a sudden, these charter schools are getting rid of their behavior policies. You're a crazy right-wing radical if you think that men and women are different and you can't change gender. It went wild from about 2016 to about 2022, and then you started seeing a lot of parent pushback.
That's a really good point, because we'll say conservative, but I think you're right. Traditional, that it wasn't necessarily conservative, not Republican, Democrat, but just your traditional forces that understood, how education works, what works, and that they were able to kind of hold the tide of more progressive forces of education. In the 90s, when you were in school to be a teacher, did you see a change as you were being educated? From my research, and I've watched podcasts on this, and I've actually watched the lectures, I've read some of the books about the mid to late 90s, there was a real shift in the schools of education where almost like a conscious decision was made that as a teacher, an educator, Paulo Freire view, we can mold and make the society we want if we can get to the children as young as possible and kind of create revolutionaries.
Yeah, so you're referencing Paulo Freire, he was writing in the late 70s. He's a Brazilian Marxist. His book is one of the most assigned books to prospective teachers in schools of education. It's the third most cited book in all of the social sciences. He's this wildly influential thinker that very few people know about. We've all at least heard the name Rousseau or Kant, but many people haven't heard the name Paulo Freire, despite his influence in the last half century. And he maps the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy of Marx onto student and teacher, adult and child. This idea that any adult imposition of rules is oppressive. The idea that there are some things that kids should learn, like they should learn to their phonics, that they should learn germ theory, that there are certain moments in history that they should learn about. These are all oppressive. And his ideas kind of took fire in the schools of education, and then they kind of became dominant around the 90s. That's when we have Gloria Ladson-Billings wrote this very highly cited article on what's critical race theory doing in education. That was in 1995. You can look that one up. Tens of thousands of citations. Again, another very influential academic paper. And this idea that schools exist not to train students in academics, not to teach them knowledge, not to teach them right from wrong, but to train up activists to deconstruct and change society. That critical pedagogy, that radical belief, that fringe idea that schools are meant to be institutions of activism really took off in the 90s, like you said.
So I have in the background Debbie Irving. And how do I know Debbie Irving? Because I made a point for the last 4 years to not just read about the professional development and training that was offered to teachers in this country and in Wisconsin. I actually attended, because a lot of them all went to Zoom, I attended all-day trainings, and she was a speaker, I think on 2 different occasions. Mind you, she was paid, this is all funded with federal dollars. Now it was. Now a lot of that federal funding has been cut off. I'm sure that they are trying to figure out a way to still fund the Equity Institute and other programs like that around the country. But she was paid for with our federal tax dollars. and came to speak to teachers in Wisconsin and talk to them about the dominant cultures, saying that it's white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied Christian values, and this is bad. This is bad. I mean, the things that I sat through, hours and hundreds of hours of this, every time I thought, just when I've heard everything, there was something else. There would be some new crazy thing, and then I would go through the comments of the mainly kind of DEI administrators, teachers that were there, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant. Oh, I love this. Oh, go girl, you're so right. They're all mainly white women, mind you. Okay, all white women watching this. I'm Puerto Rican. They consider me a racist, but they, of course, are not. And high-fiving about, oh yeah, oh my gosh, white people are so bad. Oh, I just thought, I'm in the upside down here.
Yeah, when all of this kind of started breaking into the news, I remember thinking like this is a surprise to people. People don't know that this is going on. This was Monday afternoon in the in-service professional development session for me. When I was in my school of education at UW-Madison, my teacher prep program, we were learning about transgender literacies. We had Black Lives Matter discussion circles.
What year was that?
2015.
So that just shows
this was pre-Trump.
Yeah.
So it was there. We were reading, academic scholarly articles about how to incorporate critical race theory into our lessons, or how critical race theory informs policies. All of this stuff has been around for 10, 20, 30 years. And again, when it broke into the news, I was like, we need to tell people this. I thought everyone knew because this is just there. And then what threw me through even more of a loop was watching so many teachers deny it, say, no, that's not happening. Like, what do you mean it's not happening? Again, this was Monday. I just sat through a lecture. Here's a screenshot from it. And then I'm being called a liar on social media when I'm just showing a screenshot of the PowerPoint that I sat through 48 hours ago.
Oh, yes. I went to testify about what was going on in my school district in Madison and was laughed at. Like, that's not happening. That's not true. Like, oh, next you're going to say you saw unicorns. This is all critical race theory. Like, it's just a highbrow theory developed by Derek Bell in, legal studies. And if you're going to get your PhD, you might learn about it. And this is where I'd come and say, oh, wait, what about the fact that here are the mindset cards that were promoted, and they're saying commit these cards to memory, how to coach equity, how to use them, and how you can apply these in your classrooms. And when there's an equity audit, and you would know this, so an equity audit, one of the auditor comes around and they look in the classroom and they're looking, where is your diversity? Where is it? Like, they don't just give these professional development sessions and walk away, especially if you've had an equity audit. Like, you're going to hire a firm for 5 years, and for 5 years, they are going to closely monitor you. And they're going to demand, they're going to go through your classroom, go through your policies. They're going to put on more professional development. Look at, you're under a microscope for 5 years, and this is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it never stops. We in Mequon and in Wauwatosa, Gloria Ladson Billings was brought into our district to lecture in
critical race theorist for listeners.
Yes. Yeah, I'm probably I'm getting so excited to talk about it. But yeah, she wrote the book Critical Race Theory in Education. And that's why when they're saying, oh, it's not in education, I was like, but wait, here's the book, and here's another one, and here's the other one she wrote, how to bring it into education. She was a professor emeritus in Madison, and
I sat through. She was one of the professors in my program.
Really?
Yeah. What I think we need to return back to here, though, is when schools adopt these policies, these curricula, these programs, they fail students. Like you said, Wauwatosa, and we're talking about Wauwatosa because it's close to both of us, but because it's such a representative district. It's a test district. It could be any school district across the country, not just the San Franciscos and Portlands. It used to be one of the best in the state. And now it has a reputation for fights, weekly fights, daily fights, just brawls breaking out in the hallway. They're not safe. Their scores are tanking. Teachers are leaving. There's a whole lot of parental kerfuffle going on right now at the districts or at the board meetings regularly, because families are leaving the area because of the schools. They don't have, it's not a super rich area. They don't have the money to send their kid to like a $15,000 a year private school. Their only option is to move, but they don't want to move because Barbados is a nice area. Yeah. So it is ruining the school district.
It is. And we just had NAEP numbers just came out, and Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, Black children that were, they NAEP tests, it's third grade or fourth grade?
Fourth grade, eighth grade, and occasionally 12th grade.
So fourth grade, only 5% of Black fourth graders in Milwaukee could read at a grade proficient level. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, you got to be careful when you're looking at, all states have to have district report cards now. It was a part of the Every Student Succeeds Act under Obama, that states have to put out district and school report cards. Don't really look at the report cards, look at the reading scores. I looked at every single report card in Milwaukee. It was like 150 some schools. And there were, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it was something like 30 schools that meet expectations or exceed expectations, and fewer than 20% of their students could read at grade level. I mean, if you have a school of 100 students and 5% of their African-American students can read at grade level, that means you have 1 or 2 or 3 kids. You got little Johnny in second grade who can read at grade level, and then 99 other kids are stumbling through fourth grade material, third grade material. When you put the number, not just a percentage, but you realize that means there's only 3 kids in that school who can read on grade level out of 200, out of 300, your jaw drops to the floor.
Yeah, this happens everywhere, but they will set up a standard, and then they'll say, I know even in my district, they'll say, oh, well, we beat out Milwaukee. 55% of our fourth graders can read at grade level in fourth grade. I mean, I'm not a teacher, but 55% sounds like an F to me. Mm-hmm. Like if I got a 55% on a test, that's a failing grade. That's nothing to celebrate. And saying that we were able, a district that was once nationally ranked, and this is happening all over the country. There, but at Heritage Foundation, several of my friends have written about this. They write about this. They write about school districts that were once the apple of the eye of a state. They were nationally ranked. These were premier public school districts, that were comparable to even private schools. And once they kind of got kind of more radical and took the eye off the ball, and like you said, they said, oh, it's racist to have STEM programs or to have gifted and talented programs. We've got to get rid of that. Then what happens? The school starts to fall apart. The parents that can't afford to leave, and they go to private school, or they homeschool, they do whatever. And then you've got less kids there. And then suddenly you don't want to move to that area because it's not as good of a school district. So you have less families. And funding formulas for across the country, the funding formula for a school district is based on how many students. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit for those who may not understand that.
Yeah, schools get money based on how many students attend, though they're called hold harmless policies, where basically at a certain point they stop losing money. So even these failing districts, no matter how many kids they lose, they're just going to keep getting public funds. because our public school system seems intent on bankrolling failure, while at the same time blocking funds to private or home or charter schools that are actually succeeding. All the public monies go to the failing schools, and then the unions do everything they can to keep money from going to the successful schools. And we fund failure and defund success, which is the exact opposite of what we should be doing.
That's another topic to quickly, I mean, these are all such big topics, but to get to in Wisconsin, even though we've got a Democrat governor and he's, he really fights expanding school choice. We do have school choice in Wisconsin. It's limited based on income, but it's successful. And I know my friend Chris Lawrence at School Choice Wisconsin, they will have statistics that show the change that happens. My daughter's in a choice school. When a kid is able to escape these bad inner city schools and go to a charter school, it makes a world of difference, but they're so underfunded.
Yeah, charter schools, choice schools makes it almost half per pupil per student what these public schools do. So even if there's no improvement in outcomes, they're still significantly outperforming, because even if they're just doing as well, they're doing as well with fewer resources. So they are. Another thing to look for, the phrase in the research is called competitive effects, where school choice and charter schools actually make traditional public schools better too. So in the districts where you have more charter schools, you have better school choice laws, the public schools have to compete now. They don't just get that guaranteed state, underwriting. So they have to make their curriculum better. They have to make their policies better. They have to focus on academics and keep the hallways orderly and punish kids who are picking fights and all of these kinds of things. So school choice in the literature actually makes traditional public schools better too. You'll hear from the media, you'll hear from union advocates that school choice is going to ruin public schools. Charter schools are going to defund public schools, and that's just not the case. They make the schools better.
Lakeshore Classical, where you were an assistant principal, that was a labor of love. I know people like the fight to open up that school, and there are families that drive an hour just to get their kid, an hour each way. There's waiting lists to get there. St. Augustine is another one that will be opening up here in Wisconsin. And there are states now all over the country, and maybe you've done some research of that through now in your current role, where now things are really changing. So in red states with Republican governors, Republican legislature, they are passing universal school choice laws. They are funding school choice. And President Trump is now, the Department of Education is also funding it at the federal level. The big, beautiful bill has $1,700 per child funding, and I think all of that's going to go up, and there's going to be more funding. So what is that going to help bring about change? I mean, it's a big issue, and there's certainly not enough money to get every kid into the school of their choice, but what will bring about change?
Yeah, you talked about the one big beautiful bill, which I think we should start calling OB3 for short. But there's a tax credit in there, so it's not. I mean, it's facilitated by the federal government, but it's not actually funded by our tax dollars. The way it works is if I want to give money to this scholarship granting organization, I can for 100% tax credit. So I have however much money I give, it's written off in my taxes. So I can give my money to this organization, and then that organization provides scholarships for students to attend a private school, to buy materials for homeschooling, a number of other educational costs. And it's going to allow more and more and more institutions to build, to form more Lake Country Classical Academies, more Great Hearts Academies, more Hillsdale charter schools, more homeschools, more co-ops, more everything. And it doesn't just have to be this classical flavor. Like, I am an advocate of classical education, traditional pedagogy, but if parents don't want that, you know, I think they're wrong. I'm a big fan of classical education, but I respect your right as a parent to choose otherwise. You know, if you want like a project-based learning or an online school, not what I'm going to pick for my kids, but your kids aren't mine. So you can choose something different for your kids that aligns more with your values.
There's actually a North Shore Classical Academy that is in the process. They're looking for a place to start building in my area in Ozaukee County. So, and because they tried to get funded through the state, they tried everything, and finally they've secured private funding. So they're starting to build, and I think you're going to see more of that. There has to be some innovative solutions, right? I was just talking with someone about this, when in a live stream, and we were talking, my friend from New Jersey, Alex, and we were talking about the way school's set up. It hasn't changed in over 100 years. It hasn't innovated. And I'm not sure that I agree with the way it's set up now. I think that all kids are different. There can be different ways to school your kid, and that I feel like schools right now are kind of like daycares. And the model is like, keep the kids in school from this certain time so parents can work, and they need to, because that's the way our economy is built. So fixing public education is hard, considering that our economy and the way our lifestyle, is built around the public school year. For me, spring break, summer, everything is built around the school year. So how can we change something that's like just so entrenched?
Yeah, it's going to take policy, and this is where my policy nerd kind of dry conversation has to come in. But one of them is school choice. So you need to have funds for those alternatives. Private schools cannot compete with free. Public education is free. So unless you have something like vouchers or ESAs to kind of help parents afford an alternative, then the majority of families will still choose traditional public education simply because it's free. And then there's a lot of other regulation we're going to have to get out of the way. And this is where it kind of gets dry and boring, and people don't want to talk about charter school caps and things like this. But in New York, there are, I think it's only 250 charter schools. I don't remember the exact number, but there's a cap. There's a limit on the number of charter schools that can exist. There are things like policies that allow districts to not sell empty and vacant buildings to private or charter schools. There are like charter authorizing, like, bleh, I'm going to fall asleep when I talk about that. But it depends on the state. Some states, only the local school district can authorize a charter school, or only the state board of education can authorize a charter or private school. And you know what the district or the state board of education is going to do? They're not going to authorize any competition. So there are a lot of these policies.
They want the dollars. Every kid that's funding for them. They don't want to lose the funding.
Yeah. So there's a lot of these kind of behind the scenes, real in the weeds, nitty gritty, the things that only policy wonks usually think about, that we need to start talking about more and get rid of them so that we can have this Cambrian explosion of options.
It's important that you say that. My husband is in commercial real estate, and that was something I found out 5 years ago. Like, hey, there's an empty building. Why not make a school? Well, you can't. They will not sell that building to another school. Like a private school can't come in and say, oh, I'll take this building. Our population's declined. We don't need all these buildings. We'll get rid of one. We'll sell it. We'll take that money, and maybe we could apply it towards our debt so we can stop constantly asking for, like what happens like every year. There's, we need to go through the taxpayers. We have to file a referendum. We've got, they're never, every single year I attend the end of year school board meeting, and oops, I don't know what happened. We lost $6 million. We don't know what happened.
Yeah, you talk to a lot of these new school founders. What are the biggest challenges that they face? invariably you're going to hear facilities. I always, when I first started having these conversations with school founders, I was expecting them to say politics, to say, getting good teachers for it, going through this new curriculum the first time, setting up the discipline code, enforcing it, whatever, getting enough enrollment. No, that was never the case. It was, we don't have a building, and the district, population is in decline. People aren't having as many other kids. That district has 2 buildings that are sitting empty.
Yep.
And 5 buildings that are half full every single day, but they won't sell them to us. So we are working on a lease out of a strip mall, next to a Walgreens. It's not appealing. It's not pretty. We would love to get a building, renovate it, have a gym, have more space, but we can't. So we're going to work with what we got. And facilities is a big question, both a waste of money for schools as we kind of have this population decline, and then so waste of money for public schools, and the lack of space for alternative schools.
So, and you talk about how unsafe some of these schools in our country have become, public schools. For us, Milwaukee, extremely unsafe. And primarily, the people that want to have all of these professional development about white racism, and yet they force kids like myself. I grew up in Milwaukee in the public school. I would have had to go through, were it not for the fact that a charity organization paid for me and my family to go to a Catholic school, was one where drugs, prostitution, crime, the middle school was a hellhole. And so I was spared that. And because I was able to get an education, I was able to get out of poverty, help take care of my parents as well. And my whole family was able to escape poverty as we all, one by one, received our education, went on to college, and were able to rise above the sort of social status we would have been forced to stay in were we, who knows what would have happened if we would have had to attend those schools. And so I think it really is, there's not a whole lot I love about George Bush anymore, but I do think that he was right when he said, when he made the comment that it's a form of prejudice to force these kids to stay in the worst schools in the district and provide them no way out. They get the most funding, the federal dollars, the state dollars, the relief, the grants that these school districts get. You could put a kid through college, high school, everything for what they get a year. Sometimes $28,000 a year in New York, $42,000 a year per kid. It's astronomical, the amount of money that these districts get, and yet there's no evidence that they're actually doing something for these kids because they're mired in policies. There are policies that make it impossible to teach there. Good teachers don't last. They won't stay. They're not rewarded. If you're a good teacher and you're actually doing something, they've made movies about it. Lean on Me, Stand and Deliver. There's real life stories all the time. I've met good teachers. There's good teachers like yourself. And I've met many in Wauwatosa too that hung on as long as they could. But finally, they're like, you know what? My cousin who's a teacher, pregnant, got kicked in the stomach. And finally, she's like, I can't teach anymore. I can't do this. You know?
The phrase that Bush used that, he needs an award just for incepting this phrase into public conversation, is the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yes, that's it.
Yep. And it really is. It's so condescending. This idea that, student A can't behave or can't work silently because he's poor and black. And it's just, if anyone else were to say that, you'd realize that's an incredibly racist thing to say. And it's not doing him any good to say, oh, well, you're from a rough background, so we can't expect that much of you, right? We need to just give you as many excuses as you need. We're going to give you all of these extensions. You're never going to get in trouble because you can't help yourself. That's not what helps students. What helps students is saying, look, I know you've got a rough background, but you're better than this. You are going to rise up. You are going to turn that in on time. You are going to read this difficult work of classic literature. You are going to pass that test. You are going to sit down. You are going to behave. If you don't meet that expectation, I'm going to hold you accountable for it and then help you meet it later on, right? It's this empowering, holding kids to high standards, holding them accountable if they don't reach those standards. And that is what's going to push kids out of poverty into success, not this condescension, this soft bigotry of low expectations.
And I can say I lived it when I started middle school at this Catholic school in St. Francis. I was 3 years behind, and I felt like I was drowning at first. My teachers were so great, the nuns, the priests, the regular teachers. And by the end of the year, I was doing better than half the class. And the next year I did better and better. But I had great parents that they, when the teacher said she needs to do this, this, and this, they did it. They would stay up late at night making sure I did things. When my brothers were naughty, they listened to the teachers. You have to be there's parental rights and parental responsibilities. Mm-hmm. You've got to, as a parent, be willing to do the work as well. You've got to make sure that you're checking in and you're going to teachers' conferences. And when you see a bad grade, that you're calling the teacher saying, hey, let's meet. I want to know what's up. Maybe is this a learning issue? Are they having a problem, or are they not paying attention? Or, mm-hmm. Get to the bottom of these things. And my experience, teachers have been partners with me, but I've always been very involved. And even to this day, as much as everyone knows I'm a Republican, everyone knows I'm an activist, I don't have a problem at my daughter's public school. I talk with the teachers, I meet with them, I communicate with them, and I've not had issues. When I do have even a small issue, I address it right away and it gets taken care of. Now, is she going to a classical conservative school? No, I do wish that there were some things different, but actually I've seen improvement over the last few years. And I think it's because more parents have gotten involved, and they didn't get away with it anymore. And I think a lot of teachers, even those that don't agree with me, were grateful that a spotlight had been kind of shined and they could get back to teaching the way they wanted to and didn't have to go along with a lot of the garbage anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of my messages. I'm often asked, Buck, what do I do? Friends on podcasts like this, what's your message to parents who are going through, their kids at a chaotic school, they're sitting in classes with kind of a lot of this inappropriate content or progressive messaging? What are parents to do? And my reminder to them is that the influence that a school has on your student is so incredibly small compared to yours. You don't want to completely discount what schools are doing. That's not a reason to be complacent and sit back and do nothing. But understand that if you're reading to your kids before bed every night, if you're sitting down, putting phones away and talking with them over dinner, if you're taking them out, my wife and I take turns taking our oldest on, mommy-daughter, daddy-daughter dates so we can talk with her, see what's on her mind. If you're looking at their homework, if you're communicating with the school, even if your kid's at a so-called bad school, they're going to turn out just fine because they have a good parent who's guiding them, who's protecting them, who's helping them make sense of whatever insanity they're seeing in class, who's working with them to make sure they're learning the content, they're learning the math, the reading, all of these kinds of things. Like you said, it's parents' rights and also parents' responsibilities.
I would say too that I know that this isn't always the case, but there are parents who could not afford to get out of school districts like Wauwatosa. They couldn't move, or they had an older child that was about to graduate, so they couldn't leave. But they couldn't stay. The elementary school was too much. They didn't want their kids exposed to this stuff early. And there are scholarships, there are programs. Talk to churches, I would advocate, talk to organizations, and organizations like mine. There's organizations like School Choice Wisconsin. Try and find ways to see, maybe I can do something so I can afford that private school. Maybe there's a scholarship. Maybe there's a break in tuition I can get. Maybe there's something I can do. try and just where there's a will, there's a way, try to find that. Also, you can try to move to a different school district. I know there's waiting lists, but you keep trying to do that. But yes, just keep staying involved and find, there's going to be a few good teachers that just try and find them and kind of align with them and try, just keep talking, because I recently had something happen where in high school, some parents came to me and said they're teaching, my kid had to write a paper on transgender for junior, long story, but at the end, I didn't go hot and heavy to a school board meeting yelling. I didn't call and I didn't put out social media posts. What I said was talk to the teacher, talk to the superintendent, talk to the principal, explain the situation and see what you can do quietly. And they were able to resolve this. And it turned out the teacher was like, I really didn't want to teach this, but I kind of felt like I had to. And it was a resolved situation. So you don't always have to like go in guns a-blazing. Sometimes it's good to be respectful, kind, curious, and show that we may not agree on everything, but you get that this is my kid. This is how I feel. I'm sure you can understand why I have a problem with this. Can't we work this out?
Yeah.
I think you can usually work something out.
I got no better advice than what you just offered.
It's just, but then there are some areas, go testify in Madison and you'll see there's some areas where try to move.
Yeah. I mean that if the school board is all in on progressivism and you're not going to be able to vote them out, then there are only so many paths for correction out there. If the community has voted for progressivism, then they're going to get what they voted for. Good and hard is the old phrase. And the schools are going to go down the toilet, and the school board is in control of the curriculum, the policy, everything. So there's only so much that you can do. And like you said, at some point, your only option might be finding another school, homeschooling, seeing what a charter, like I might send my own kids to a charter school, the LCCA, it's a 30-40 minute drive for me. But that might be my only option. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a sacrifice I'm going to make for the good of my own kids.
So I know it's time flies, but I have two last kind of burning questions. Again, to reiterate with the big, beautiful bill, that tax credit, because that's new information for me. And I think that's really interesting that you can give $1,700 or to an organization, and that is tax write-off. I'm actually going to talk to my husband about this right when we get up, because that's a great thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's for a lot of families, they want something better for their kids, but they just can't afford it. We're not all celebrities. We're not all best-selling authors. We're not all. So I got to hold my camera in place. My cat is trying to join us behind the scenes and going to knock my camera over if she's not careful. We're not all celebrities. We're not all district consultants that are going to be making millions of dollars selling insanity to schools. So we can't all afford a private school tuition. But if we could get $1,700 covered, maybe we can make ends meet.
Yeah.
So the more of these policies that get passed, it's more and more off ramps into something better for families.
Yes. And I'm glad that this is, because then if you have a state where they're not going to vote for universal school choice and the governor's not going to sign it into law, and you're thinking, well, what about me? What can I do? There does need to be, I like to keep the federal government out of local education, but I think, and maybe it's different as a conservative, I think we should start funding the things that we believe in. we should start focusing on funding and finding curriculum that isn't crazy. Funding and finding, the right kind. Like the federal government all these years has been funding and paying for this professional development and this curriculum, and it's all, garbage. So now maybe we need to help fund alternatives, that are rooted, they're not religious, they're not going to be more conservative, but they're just going to be good. Based on what's proven to work. Not full language, not reading by guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, stories to tell about that.
Again, I got no better advice than what you're offering right now. There are alternative institutions setting up out there. There are curriculum companies that are good out there. There are alternative standardized tests that are out there. One thing though about the tax credit and big beautiful bill, unfortunately, governors have to opt into it. So it's there as a program, but then the governor has to decide that they're going to run it in the state. So this is something that your Moms for Liberty people need to be on top of, pressuring the governor to opt into it and making it clear and that there are going to be electoral consequences if they choose not to.
Yes, that's a good point.
And I think it sets up a real pain in the tuchus for blue state governors because it's such an easy messaging cell for conservatives. You don't want to fund students. You don't want to create scholarships for poor kids to go to better schools. How dare you?
Yes.
And it's going to be a rhetorical nightmare, as it should be, if any of these Democratic governors decide not to opt into it.
That's a very good point. That's something we really do need to focus on. And I remember early on talking about the bill and that in my case, Governor Evers would have to opt in. And we've got to really put the pressure on them especially as they start to go into session again in the fall. Mm-hmm. And finally, a burning question, believe it or not, this is hotly debated right now. And there are several states that have passed legislation that bans.
Oh, I see where we're going with this. Yeah.
In schools. And Wisconsin is now, that legislation was introduced, and now it's going to be headed for the Wisconsin State Senate. And it's strange bedfellows. Like, I don't know what I theoretically do not want kids on devices in the classroom, but there's a lot of debate on whether or not you should do that or you can do that, and who's going to enforce it.
Yeah. I mean, I am a big proponent of it. I was just in July in a debate at a convening of researchers, and I was taking the pro side that we should be banning phones in schools. The research generally finds that these policies, kids spend more time running around at recess. Academics, so end of course exams and standardized tests, scores in both reading and math go up. Kids are socializing more. They have more warm and positive feelings toward their schools when these phones are kept out of the building. It was the policy 20, 30 years ago, and we're just kind of going back to that. What approach is best is still kind of to be determined because they've only been around for a year or two. There's not been enough time to kind of let the dust settle and see what's most effective. You do it at the state house, and then you have a universal policy across the state. But then district by district, if you don't have a superintendent or building principals that are bought into it, then it's not actually enforced. Versus if you do it district by district by district, you're going to have much better buy-in, but then it's not necessarily universal across the state. So there's kinds of these trade-offs. I don't know which one my preference is yet because I'm still trying to figure that one out. Some of the pushback that you'll see, I see a lot. We need kids to have phones because that's the only way we're going to expose some of the woke stuff. And I just long run, that cannot be the approach that conservatives take. I don't want to put that on kids. They're not there to be the surveillance state. They're not there to be accountability for us. I don't want to deputize them into that role. I want them to go to school to learn and parents can do open records requests. We can do, I go through state level curricula and standards all the time. We can expose stuff that way. We can talk to teachers. We can look at our kids' work. There's other ways to have that transparency. We can push for transparency laws. And the other one that you see is, we want phones to happen kids to have phones in case of an emergency. But that's another one where it's not clear if phones actually make kids safer or less safe, right? If something is going on, if there's a fire, if there's a school shooter, if there's some other emergency, and kids are sitting there, they're not paying attention to what's actually happening. So there's kind of a counter narrative there that I don't think phones are actually going to help or make the kids safer in that case. I think they're going to distract them and make them less safe in that case.
Well, my daughter's at my daughter's 8th grade school, like no phones. If they bring a phone out, gets taken away, and I have to go pick it up. Parent has to go get it, so it's gone until the parent gets it. But in the high school, they can't have it out in the classroom, but they can have it on their person. I still think I don't like the phones in school. When my daughter texts me, I'm just like, why do you have time to text me?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of bell-to-bell bans because I don't want kids to have them at recess. I don't want them to have them at lunch. I worked at a school that allowed phones all the time. You walk into a lunchroom and the kids are
they're not talking.
They're staring down at their phone. They're not playing cards. They're not making jokes. They're not throwing food when the supervisor has their back turned. Not that I ever did that. But they're not doing what kids normally do and interacting and having fun. They're just all staring at TikTok in any free moment that they have.
I chaperone my kids' 8th grade trips.
Mm-hmm.
We take the phones away. They're not allowed to have them. They're talking, they're laughing. I would see other schools where they had phones. Every single kid is on the phone. Every kid sitting on the phone. No one's talking. No one's communicating. Take away the phone on the trip. And at first they fought us. Oh, they fought us. Like they get it. They got it at night. But by the end, they were talking and laughing and they got to know each other. Sometimes it's build relationships they hadn't had before. So it was great. The only issue is they bring their MacBooks and Chromebooks in high school. And so you kind of have to make sure they can't do the same thing on a Chromebook that they can on their phone. And I think Chromebooks they're being given now to like in 4th grade. They have iPads, but in kindergarten. So.
Yep. One computing and, oh man, what was the number? I think Chicago Public Schools spent something like $300 million post-pandemic on tech. So that's software, computers, tablets, iPads for kindergartners. Just tech and schools is a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, but that's a whole nother discussion.
I was going to say, I worked at and I'm a proponent of classical education. So I think you can imagine where I fall on that one.
It is a whole other discussion because they're data mining our kids too.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing. There's money behind it. There's dollars behind it. There's reason why they want to give these kids these things to the schools, and the schools can just give them out for free. Like nothing's free. There's
a reason that all the tech billionaires send their kids to tech-free schools.
Yeah. Notice how all the celebrities and billionaires, they don't let their kids have phones. I've actually seen TikTok stories where, some superstars like my son turned 16 and I gave him a phone. So they know something. They are like, they're wealthy, they have everything, and yet they take their kids away from all of it because they know how bad it is and how dangerous it is. So, Well, thank you so much for coming on. We could just keep talking. There's so many different things to talk about in education, but I appreciate.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.
Yes, and I look forward to talking to you again, and look forward to reading more. Your articles are great. So, what are you doing right now, and how can people learn more about you?
Yeah, I'm at the American Enterprise Institute right now. There, I'm half my time is as a research fellow, so that's researching education. I do a lot of open records requests and kind of journalistic type things. I do a lot of reporting on research of best practices in the classroom. And then the other half is I lead the Conservative Education Reform Network, which is just a network of anyone. We're kind of a big tent on the right. So anyone who considers themselves a conservative and is working on education reform, be they teachers, parents, professors, policymakers, think tank fellows, institution leadings, curriculum writers, authors, anyone. If you're on the right and you work on education, you can be a part of the network.
And I'll be sure to close out with your handle to follow you on Twitter. I do. And your little consortium, I love the stuff that you guys post. There's always articles, there's information. There's so much out there. So I'll make sure that everyone knows how to read what you do and listen to what you have to say. I've been following you for a long time, and I thank you very much for all that you do. And maybe I'll see you sometime around in Wisconsin. Now I'm in Wauwatosa all the time because my son lives there.
Yep. So, likewise to all of the above. Great work you're doing at Moms for Liberty.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks a lot. Bye. That was an amazing conversation with Daniel Buck. And just going to recap some of what we discussed. It's really important to understand what is in curriculum and why it's there. Again, sex assigned at birth. This is a slide presentation that was given at a professional development and is part of a curriculum, Advocates for Youth, Comprehensive Sexuality Education. This is a slide presentation meant for upper elementary school students to middle school students. And you can see sex assigned at birth, gender identity, talking about these gender expression. There is a YouTube short video talking about pronouns, gender pronouns. And look at, this is the age of the child that this is meant to attract. This is meant for young kids. Elementary students, look at this, creating LGBTQ plus affirming elementary schools. First slide. Basically, is this too young? Is kindergarten, first grade too young for kids to learn about LGBTQIA plus topics? Oh no, it's not. It's not too young. And here they proceed that they're convincing educators, you need to talk about these topics as young as possible. And then here is the gender snow person. All of this is meant for young kids. This is another presentation. These are all actual presentations used in classrooms in Wisconsin. What about this? This is a slideshow presentation meant for school psychologists. And in this presentation, they talk about sex assigned at birth, intersex, gender identity, transgender, gender nonconforming, two-spirit, sexual orientation, asexual, other terms. What other terms? Questioning, queer, gender expression, furry. Yes. Crazy, right? But this is a presentation that was given to schools. Why say gay? K through 3 lessons. Showing kindness and support to transgender and non-binary people. If your parents aren't accepting of your identity, I'm your mom now? No way. So you can see, this is, I could be here for hours. I could be here for hours going through slideshow after slideshow. But here is the solution. Know your parental rights. Now we saw the problem. Here's the solution. You need to know your parental rights. So we have seen the problem. Here's the solution. Know your parental rights. Moms for Liberty, momsforliberty.org. And below I've had the information to follow Daniel on X. But now if you go to momsforliberty.org, you can download this free copy of a brochure, Know Your Parental Rights, but there's so much more than this. This is just a great brochure that you can share and hand out to people in your community. If you have a Moms for Liberty chapter, these are available to you that you can share and spread with your members, with your school board members. But on top of this, there is a plethora of resources. At Moms for Liberty Academy, we've got slideshows, presentations, lectures, YouTube videos, news articles, scholarly articles, data, research, everything that you could possibly want to know about controversial subjects, but also information about alternative curriculums and solutions. There's going to be a lot more information about solutions and what you can do and how you can make a change. And of course, the big solution is to run for school board, to support a candidate who's running for school board, to win elections, and to make really great changes, policy changes that will turn the tide in your school district. So get your copy today. Go to momsforliberty.org. It's great. And are you ready? Are you registered for the Joyful Warriors National Summit? If you aren't, you need to do so soon. It's going to be great. And don't forget to follow us on social media at Moms for Liberty. Number 4, at Moms for Liberty. And I'll put that banner up as well. Yeah, so follow us on X at Moms for Liberty. Follow us on X at Moms for Liberty. This has been a great conversation. We covered so many topics, and be sure to follow Daniel Buck, follow Moms for Liberty on X as well, and don't forget to get your free guide, okay? Know Your Rights. We also have a portal for opt-outs. So everything that you need so that you can opt out of this woke radical curriculum is ready at your fingertips. As I leave for today, I'm going to show the video about Moms for Liberty Summit, as I always do. And remember, if you haven't registered now, you need to register soon. It's going to be amazing. That's all for today. Have a great day. Bye.
Elena, what state are you from?
New York.
Hawaii.
I'm from Texas, Washington. I have my kids actually with me to do the march.
Wherever I go, odds are there is a Moms for Liberty group or a whole tribe in the room sounding off loud and proud.
And you could see the passion here because it's about supporting kids.
Pledge to each other that we will live like men and women who are determined to remain free.
I'm for parental rights.